Today we're not just going to look at another conspiracy theory. We're going to put one on the operating table. We're going to deconstruct what you could call a super conspiracy, one of these modern mythologies that claims to explain literally everything, so we can really understand how a worldview this massive actually gets built.
Okay, let's just start with the core claim, right? The absolutely startling idea at the heart of David Icke's entire universe. Now, this sounds like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, but for a huge number of people, this single sentence is the key to unlocking the hidden history of our entire planet. So the real puzzle for us today is, how on earth do you get here?
So, how does a worldview this huge even begin? Well, in this case, it really starts with one man. And to get the theory, you first have to understand his journey, because believe me, before the interdimensional lizards, David Icke was someone you would never, ever expect.
I mean, just look at this timeline. In the 1980s, David Icke was a household name in the UK. He was this beloved sports presenter on the BBC. He was the definition of mainstream. But then, in 1991, after what he described as a series of profound spiritual experiences, he went on the nation's biggest chat show and declared he was the son of the Godhead. His career just imploded, seemingly overnight.
But here's the really wild part. That moment of absolute public humiliation, it wasn't the end. In a very strange way, it became his superpower. See, for a growing audience that already felt alienated from the mainstream, watching the entire establishment laugh at him was the ultimate proof that he must be onto something big. The ridicule actually became his credibility.
And that anti-establishment credibility is so important. Because these massive, all-encompassing worldviews, they aren't just invented out of thin air. They're assembled. They are pieced together, bit by bit, from a whole bunch of different pre-existing ideas.
There's actually a great word for this process, bricolage, and people like Icke Well are what you'd call bricoleurs. Think of them as master assemblers. They're taking bits and pieces of old myths, spiritual traditions, and modern political paranoia, and they're synthesizing them into something totally new and incredibly detailed.
So, here it is, the basic recipe. First, you find an ancient template, a kind of prison planet story that's been around for centuries. Then, you layer in a secret history, something full of lost continents and hidden masters, to suggest there's a truth out there we're not being told. Then, to make it feel current, you give it a sci-fi twist, turning ancient spirits into actual physical aliens. And finally, the most crucial step, you connect all of that to real-world political anxieties that people are already feeling.
Okay, so let's actually break down those ingredients. We're going to trace the intellectual DNA of this whole reptilian idea, and we're starting with a piece of the puzzle from almost 2,000 years ago.
All right, step one, the ancient template. This comes from Gnosticism, a mystical tradition from the early Christian era. So the Gnostics believed our world wasn't made by a perfect God, but by a lesser, flawed, sometimes even evil creator called the Demiurge. And this flawed reality is guarded by his cosmic jailers, the Archons, who are here to keep us trapped. The only way out? Gnosis, which is secret, revealed knowledge. Does any of that sound familiar?
The parallel is, well, it's pretty shocking. The structure of the ancient Gnostic myth is a near-perfect blueprint for these modern super-conspiracies. The evil creator and his Archons, they become the reptilians or the Anunnaki. The material prison they trap us in, that becomes the Matrix, and the path to freedom through Gnosis gets reframed as a modern awakening. It's the perfect prison planet story, just dusted off and given a new name.
Now for step two, you got to add a secret history. For this, the recipe borrows heavily from the late 19th century and a woman named Helena Blavatsky, who founded Theosophy. She wrote about a hidden history of humanity, of root races and lost continents like Lemuria and Atlantis, all secretly guided by a group of spiritual masters. This really introduces that key idea of hidden controllers working behind the scenes of history.
Okay, step three, the sci-fi twist. This was the game-changing move made by Zecharia Sitchin in the 1970s. He took ancient Sumerian myths and said, hey, these aren't stories about gods, they're historical records of actual biological aliens. He called them the Anunnaki, and he claimed they came to Earth to mine gold and genetically engineered humans to be their slave race. This was crucial. It made ancient myths sound plausible to a modern scientific mindset.
And the final ingredient connects all this deep lore to politics today. This part of the recipe was really perfected by Milton William Cooper back in 1991. He took all the existing paranoia about a political New World Order and straight up merged it with an alien agenda.
In his story, the government isn't just covering up UFOs, it's actively working with evil aliens against the people. It's a traitorous enemy. And that right there is the blueprint for almost every super conspiracy that follows.
So, what happens when you mix all of these ingredients together? Well, you get a worldview that's almost impossible to argue with from the inside. It builds this kind of intellectual fortress, a system of logic that's perfectly sealed against any and all attacks.
The experts call this a closed, self-validating logical loop. It's basically a way of thinking that is designed from the ground up to be completely unfalsifiable. And it works in a few simple but really powerful steps.
So it starts when the theory gets challenged, right? Let's say a scientist or a journalist or some government agency presents evidence that totally contradicts a key part of the theory. But for someone who believes, this isn't a reason to doubt. Not at all. It's the opposite. That contradictory evidence gets instantly reinterpreted. It's not a fact. No, it's deliberate disinformation. It's a lie planted by the conspirators, the reptilians, the globalists, whoever, to throw you off their trail.
And here's the masterstroke. The fact that they are trying so hard to discredit the theory with lies, well, that's just taken as proof of how huge the conspiracy really is and how dangerously close to the truth you must be. So evidence against the theory gets magically transformed into the most powerful evidence for it. It's a perfect, unbreakable loop. So that brings us to the final and maybe the most important question of all. Why does this recipe work so well? I mean, beyond the clever logic, why are these huge, all-encompassing stories so compelling to so many people?
Well, when you really get down to it, these narratives are incredibly powerful because they tap into some of our most fundamental human needs. In a world that feels random and chaotic, they offer certainty. They give you a simple black and white explanation for evil. It's not complicated, it's just them. And maybe most importantly, they offer a path to feeling empowered. By awakening to this secret knowledge, you go from being a victim of the system to being a hero who's fighting it.
Ultimately, these kinds of theories find the best soil to grow in during what some academics call an epistemological crisis. Now, that's just a fancy term for a period, kind of like the one we're in now, where public trust is just falling off a cliff. When people no longer trust the traditional institutions, the government, science, the media, to tell them what's true, they start looking for other explanations. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought. These super conspiracies, no matter how strange they might seem on the surface, offer a complete explanation for a world that feels increasingly complex and out of control. They give you a clear villain and a sense of hidden order behind all the chaos. And that brings us to a question we all kind of have to ask ourselves. As our shared sense of reality seems to fracture more and more, what kinds of stories are we all going to choose to believe in to make sense of the world?